I'm pretty sure that God and Moses had food on the brain in this week's Torah portion. In the beginning, God says, man can't live on bread alone. In the middle, they're saying, well, this is what you're supposed to say. Ve'achalta, v'savata, uve'rachta. You should eat and you should be satiated and you should bless after meals, which becomes part of Birkat Hamazon. Then we're told once again we're living we're going to a land full of milk and honey, and I can only imagine, right? After all the years of wandering, and the Israelites saying, "Is there any food? Are we there yet? I'm thirsty. We're hungry. There was food in Egypt. Why do we have to leave?" That, like Moses, the guy wanted to, just like with the manna and the quail, just shoving it down their throats. Yes, there'll be food there. There'll be food. There'll be plenty. You should have brought snacks. Don't tell me God wasn't a Jewish mother. You should have brought snacks. But of course, the message from Moses and God is not to spite the Israelites into regretting having gone in the first place. The message from God and Moses to the Israelites is, just wait a minute. Just wait until we get to the land flowing of milk and honey. You had to work so hard when we were slaves in Egypt to Pharaoh. We had to work the land in ways that never really paid off for the work that we had to do. But when we get to the land of Israel, the land flowing and providing should be the least of your concerns. Now, as Rabbi Shaw said at the beginning of the service, that doesn't entirely make sense, because the land of Israel is an arid place that does take a lot of work to make the land, to make the desert bloom, as we had to do. But this was a different time and a place. This was a time and a place when faith is all that was asked of our ancestors, because God was going to pull those levers to make whatever needed to happen for the benefit of us. If, and we'll see this in our Torah portion, as we've heard many, many, many times before, we'll hear many, many, many times again before the end of Torah, if we do what? If we would just listen. If we would just listen and do the things that God had asked of us. Some of you have been joining me this month in our Lunch and Learn, where we have been studying the story of Choni, the circle maker. For those of you who are unfamiliar, the story of Choni goes like this. It is the week before Pesach, and it hasn't rained the entire rainy season in the land of Israel. Those of us in Florida don't worry so much when it doesn't rain for a few days. We take that as a blessing. But in the land of Israel, it only rains in the winter, from Sukkot to Pesach. And if you're a week before Pesach and it hasn't rained yet, guess what? It ain't gonna rain. Which means you now have 6 more months to wait for rain, and there is not enough water. And so the Israelites say to this guy, Choni, who seems to have the ear of God, Choni, talk to God, make it rain. Choni draws a circle around himself and says, God, I'm not leaving this circle until it rains. Chutzpahdik, right? But guess what happens? It rains. Just a little bit. Just enough so Choni could say, see people, I made it rain, leave me alone. And they say to him, Choni, that isn't enough. And Choni says, God, that isn't enough. And the rain that comes next, you would not believe. It says in the Mishnah that it was so much rain, the Israelites had to escape to higher ground, up to the Temple Mount, to avoid the waters that were rising. And then they're really faced with a crisis. Because the whole entree to the story of Choni the circle maker is a discussion amongst the rabbis for what are the things that we should cry out for, and what are the things that we should never ask for. And the thing that they say we should never ask for is for the rain to stop. So now they have a crisis. What should we do? Should we see what happens with the rains, or should we ask it to stop? Now, in the mind of the rabbis, they can say we should never ask the rains to stop because we have been promised by God there will never be too much rain. When did God promise that? Pop quiz. Noah. Thank you, Harvey. With the story of Noah, God promised, I will never again flood the earth. So the rabbis knew they should never fear too much rain. But Choni said, don't worry, I got this. And he said, God, that's enough. No more violent rain. And then the rains became normal rains, and eventually they came to a close, and people had the water that they needed. Now, I share that story not just because we're learning it this month in Lunch and Learn, but because it speaks to what our tradition tells us about the uniqueness of living on the land. Living on the land in that period, the people knew that they could expect certain things from God, like rain in its season and everything to grow. And that when it doesn't happen, we're supposed to ask ourselves, why might this be? The Torah would say, well, because you didn't observe the laws that I told you, and therefore the milk and the honey and the flow is going to pull back. But as we make our way into our own period, the message of a land flowing with milk and honey and the lesson of our relationship with the Holy One does not need to be as strict as, if you follow, then you will get. And more like the message that comes to us from those words that I said that we recite in Birkat Hamazon, the blessing after the meals that says, V'chalta v'savata uve'racha, you will eat, and you will be satiated, and then you will bless. There will be times in your life that you will only eat, just enough to get by. Okay. But there will be other times in your life that you'll be satiated, that you will have your fill. And when you do, you will bless. You're supposed to give your thanks to God. And you should feel blessed for the flowing of milk and honey, for the sweets and the savory and the bitter that you get. And if you live a life where you feel like you are blessed by what you get, that's all you need. So as you go home this evening, take a cookie from the oneg in a few minutes. Feel grateful for the blessings that you have, and wish those in your life and your loved ones a Shabbat Shalom.